Okay, you're good to go.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the Seattle Planning Commission, I'd like to humbly recognize that we are gathered on Indigenous land, the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples. We thank these caretakers of this land who have lived and continue to live here since time immemorial. We acknowledge the role that traditional Western-centric planning practices have played in harming, displacing, and attempting to erase Native communities, and we respect Indigenous rights to sovereignty and self-determination. We commit to being better listeners, learners, and to lifting Indigenous voices. We also commit to identifying racist practices, to practice allyship, and strive to center restorative land stewardship rather than unsustainable and extractive use of the land. So welcome to this November 9th meeting of the Planning Commission. We are happy to make all commission meetings open to the public, but please note that the Planning Commission does not hold public hearings because we are an advisory body. We provide recommendations to elected leaders who in turn make the actual decisions. We encourage people and organizations to provide their comments to the appropriate elected officials. Today's meeting is a hybrid with some individuals participating remotely and others are participating in person in the boards and commissions room at Seattle City Hall. Before we begin, we'd like to review our Color Brave Space norms. And I would like to ask someone, because I did not reach out in advance, to please select one that seems appropriate to today's agenda, if possible. And if you, I'd ask for someone to volunteer, and if not, I'll call on someone. Thank you, Rose. Do you mind?
Yeah. So I would pick. If I had advance notice, look for learning and commit to learning in public. Feels applicable for being called out on the spot. And then also because we're going to be talking about systems and things that I know that I personally don't know that much about. And so to avoid playing devil's advocate and pay attention so that we don't uphold white dominant power structures seems particularly relevant. So I'm excited to learn more about both our topics today.
Thank you, Rose. That was very gracious of you, and I'm sorry to have sprung that on you. We do have the intention of reaching out to people in advance, but so it goes sometimes, I guess. So if we all feel good about these norms, I suggest that we apply them to today's proceedings. So on the agenda today, we have two items, an overview of Seattle sub-area planning efforts that are currently underway, and we have a briefing on the city's climate change response framework. And I believe we'd have a quorum. So as our first, a matter of our first order of business, then it would be to approve the minutes from the last meeting on October 26th. I would ask for a motion and a second, and then if there are any discussions or changes, we can entertain those.
Rick moves that we approve the minutes.
Thank you, Rick.
And Michaela second.
Thank you, Michaela. Are there any changes or amendments? Hearing none. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
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 Opposed, no. And abstentions? They are adopted. Great. The next, let's see, these are our upcoming meetings. The next Housing and Neighborhoods Committee meeting is Thursday, December 7th at 7:30 a.m. to 9 a.m. This meeting will be held online using the MS Teams platform. Our next full commission meeting is Thursday, December 14th, 3 to 5:30 p.m. And that meeting will be held, as today's is, both in person and via MS Teams. I'd like to hand it now to our Executive Director, Vanessa.
Thank you, David. Just want to note, as David just noted, that this is a hybrid meeting, so being held both in person and via MS Teams. I'm joined by Zio and by Lauren, two commissioners, as well as John Hoy. I'd like to remind commissioners that during the course of the meeting, there will be opportunities for questions and comments. Please use the chat function of MS Teams to be recognized to speak by the chair. Please don't put substantive comment in the chat function, as members of the public cannot see that or read that. I would have read any public comment that had been received, but I've received no public comment, and we are not joined by any member of the public here in the boards and commissions room at City Hall. So I have no public comment to read. If we are joined by somebody, we do have a second opportunity towards the end of our meeting today at 5:15. So if there are people who want to join us here in the boards and commissions room, we're happy to take public comment at that time. So with that, I will turn it back to David to start the introductions. After introducing yourself, please call on a fellow commissioner to introduce themselves. Staff will wrap it up at the end, and I can always assist if commissioners on the call, because I know you can only see a certain number of shining faces, so I can always help if you don't know who to call on. So take it away,
Great.
David.
Thanks, Vanessa. Yeah, I'm David Goldberg, co-chair of the commission. He, him pronouns. I live in the Wallingford Urban Village. I work for the State Department of Transportation, and I would like to pass it to my co-chair, Michaela.
Good afternoon, Michaela Daffern, she, her pronouns. I live in Capitol Hill and I work in affordable housing policy and planning. And I'll pass it to Caleb.
My name is Caleb Twilday, he, him pronouns. I live in the Central District and work at Rainier College doing leadership development. I'll pass it on to Rose.
Hey y'all, Rose Lucello Whitson, pronouns they, them. I live up north in Licton Springs neighborhood, and then I work as a professional wetland scientist and permitting specialist with Jacobs Engineering. I'll pass it to Zio.
Hi, Zio Alvarez. I live in White Center Highland Park, she, they pronouns, and I'm a designer at an architecture firm in Seattle. Lauren?
Thanks, you. Lauren Squires, she, her. I live near the Mount Baker Light Rail Station, and I'm a multimodal transportation planner at Nelson Nygaard. Rick, did you already go?
I've not gone. I'm Rick Moeller. I use he, him pronouns. I live just north of the Wallingford Urban Village, and I'm an architect and chair of the Department of Architecture at the UW, and I will call on Radhika.
Hi everyone, I'm Radhika Nair. I use she, her pronouns. I live in Wedgwood in North Seattle, and I'm an urban planner and run a community planning firm called Civil Workshop. I'll pass it to Monica.
Andy? Oh no, are we frozen again? No.
Who did you pass it to?
To you, Andy.
Oh, okay. Andy Dannenberg, he, him, live in Northeast Seattle, and I teach at University of Washington in both urban planning and in public health. And I really can't see who hasn't gone yet on a limited
Vanessa,
screen.
Vanessa, Radhika had called on Monica next.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't hear that. Thank you, Jamie. Welcome. Monica.
Hey everyone, sorry if I missed my name in there. Oh, looking at the wrong screen. Hi everyone, my name is Monica Sharma. I use she, her pronouns. I live in the Central District and I work for King County Play Equity Coalition to make physical activity more equitable and accessible in King County. And who is still left?
Deanna, Matt.
I can go. This is Deanna.
Thank you, Deanna.
Hello, I'm Deanna Quintanar. I use she, her pronouns. I live in Capitol Hill, and I'm a multimodal transportation planner. And I'll pass it over to Matt.
Hi, I'm Matt Hutchins. I don't know if you guys can hear me, but I live in West Seattle, use he, him pronouns. I'm an architect. I guess, I don't know who else is out there.
I'll go. I'm Jamie Strobel, she, her pronouns. I live in the future 130th station area and work in climate change and environmental justice. And I will pass it back to Vanessa.
Thank you, Jamie. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vanessa Murdoch. I use she, her pronouns. I'm staff to the commission, and I will pass it over to Olivia.
Hey everyone, Olivia Baker. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm also staff to the commission. John?
Hey everyone, I'm John Hoy. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm staff to the planning commission.
And with that, we'll turn it back to you, David.
All right. Well done, everyone. You're getting better at these introductions. Our first item today is a briefing on sub-area planning, and we have a few members of the OPCD Office of Planning and Community Development staff here. I'll let you introduce yourselves as you come up. Following their presentation, I'll facilitate our discussion by first asking commissioners for any clarifying questions. If we don't have any, or you don't have a clarifying question, feel free to pass, and I'll circle back to you at the end of the questions portion of our discussion. Following the clarifying questions, we'll open it up to floor comments. Today, I'll be moderating the facilitation of our discussion so as to allow commissioners to add or respond to the topic of the discussion before moving on to the next commissioner in the queue. As such, I ask you all to note in the chat function of MS Teams which topic or issue you wish to address in your comment. Staff will assist in monitoring the queue and ensuring all commissioners have the opportunity to participate in the discussion. We have an hour for this agenda item. And then Lauren and team, please leave 30 to 35 minutes for questions and discussion. But first, I would like to ask if anyone would want to share a disclosure.
I'd like to disclose that my firm, Saber Workshop, works with OPCD on these sub-area plans.
Thanks, Radhika. Okay.
David,
so yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, David. Radhika and I had a few had an exchange of emails, and Radhika, as an owner of the firm, you actually need to recuse yourself from the discussion. It's beyond just disclosing. So if you don't mind hopping off and then joining us at 4:15, that would be great.
Okay,
My
no problem.
apologies for any confusion.
Yeah, no problem. Bye.
Thank you.
Okay.
Back to you, David. Sorry.
Yeah. So I guess we are ready for our first presenter. Or should we have all the OPCD folks introduce themselves first, or how are we going to handle that?
Great idea.
Okay.
Well, hi everyone.
Or at least the ones who are on this portion of the agenda. Sorry, Erica.
It's okay. Yeah. Hi guys. I'm Erica. I know some of you. It's really great to be here. I'm very excited to get feedback from this body of people, all of your insight. I know it's a huge gift to our project to be able to hear from your minds and thoughts. I'm Erica. I use she, her pronouns. I live in South Delridge, edge of Highland Park, if I heard mentioned. And I am very new to OPCD. I just joined in September and excited to be part of the team. And I'll pass it over to Jesse.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jesse London, an urban centers planner at OPCD as well. Also, about 2 months into my position. I live in Capitol Hill and excited to talk about these projects today. I'm passing it on to Tim.
Hi all, very nice to be here. My name is Tim Lehman, he, him. I'm the OPCD Indigenous Planning Strategist, and I've been on and off this project. I was on as a sub before I got into the office, and then because of that kind of got wrapped up into some stuff in a good way for the sub-area planning, and been I'm about 8 months in now. So 3 fairly new folks that you'll be talking with here in regards to the sub-area planning. And I'll pass it back on over to Erica.
And I think Jesse is going to share his screen if he has access to do so.
Yeah, you should be able to just take over But let me
There we
know. Oh,
go.
there it goes. Perfect.
Cool. All right. Well, good afternoon again. We are, Erica and I are the Urban Centers planners, as we mentioned, at OPCD. Started a couple months ago, but the project as a whole has been in some format or another been ongoing for roughly the past year. So I'll just get right into it. We'll start with introducing the concept as a whole of sub-area planning and really what that is and its difference between that and the comprehensive planning process, which you might be a little bit more familiar with. Primarily, the difference between the comp plan and the sub-area plan is the specificity afforded by the sub-area planning process. Sub-area plans can lead a little more directly to implementation and can be a guide by city departments, developers, community organizations, et cetera, similar to the comp plan. You'll notice in the comp plan, the most recent comp plan, that the future land use map sort of has these six areas that are these six urban centers mapped out there that do not really have the same level of detail as some of the other areas of the map, and that sort of gives us the ability in this sub-area planning process to provide that higher degree of focus to these areas. In the context of the city and the region, really, these centers accommodate more growth, which I'll get into a little bit more later. The plans will understand key trends, challenges, and opportunities, establish vision for how each center can be more resilient, equitable, and just generally successful the next 20 years. They'll identify and detail policies and actions to enable each center to grow in housing and jobs toward realizing that vision, again, related to the comp plan, which I'll get into in a second, and include not only land use policy, but economic development, capital facilities, public services, public realm, et cetera, similar areas of focus to other plans that you may have seen, with some exceptions that I'll get into. Regarding these plans in relation to the comp plan, these centers will be informed by the growth targets allocated during the comprehensive planning process, in line with Puget Sound Regional Council requirements. However, like I said before, the policies in these sub-area plans will tend to be more prescriptive, and the plans themselves can actually be adopted on a separate timeline. So they won't, at least not all of them, will be necessarily adopted on the same timeline as what the comp plan is aiming for over the course of next year and change here. So what is the process? Well, we began a multi-year sub-area planning process in 2022. We'll complete the plans on a rolling basis between 25 and 26. I'll share another timeline here in a second. This is part of the regional centers framework under the Puget Sound Regional Council's Vision 2050, which includes criteria and procedures for the regional designation of these urban centers. Preparing these plans, accommodating this additional growth in these centers, and meeting a variety of goals pertaining to sustainability, equity, a number of others, is part of what qualifies them for PSRC's Regional Growth Centers program. The plans have to address a number of things in greater detail than the citywide comp plan. Yes, policies in land use, housing, transportation, environment and climate change, economic development, et cetera. And through the regional growth centers, or the RGC process, PSRC gives crucially prioritization for federal transportation funding to these areas. And so these centers have historically, they've qualified Seattle Department of Transportation for funding opportunities in the range of $160 million or so over the past 10 years. And once they're adopted at the city level, they're subject to review and certification by PSRC. So now getting into the timeline of the six plans here a little bit. Big picture stuff here is illustrated we're currently in the early stages of our first phase of 3 plans here, downtown Northgate and Capitol Hill and First Hill. That's a single plan, Capitol First Hill. And then we'll start the plans for South Lake Union, Uptown, and the U District on a rolling basis as we wrap up those first 3. You'll notice that Cap Hill and First Hill are bundled into one item here. That is one plan. However, South Lake and Uptown, South Lake Union and Uptown are actually 2 different plans. The reason that they're on one piece of the timeline here is because they were kind of a boring answer, but they were funded together. So that's just they sort of have to share a timeline in some respects. So saves more room on the graphic, frankly. So scoping work to date, this again depicts those first 3 plans that we're working on currently. To this point, we've scoped the plans, we've identified our team of consultants, which we'll talk about a little bit, and started some outreach in the downtown and Northgate sub areas, and we're just getting into executing the engagement plan in First Hill and Capitol Hill as well. Project objectives. Specific objective of these plans is to conduct community engagement, emphasizing racial equity, develop vision and policies, and ultimately produce the sub-area plans with these principles in mind. We view these parts depicted here as iterative, and the graphic illustrates this relationship conceptually. Begins with the racial equity and engagement here in part A, which includes our racial equity toolkit and an Indigenous inclusivity guide that inform this process quite a bit. Who is involved is just as important as the what in terms of the policies that will come out at the end of the planning process. The topics this plan will integrate the principles that we identify in those in the racial equity toolkit and inclusivity guide. Let's see. We envision part A, racial equity and engagement, meaningfully shaping what is analyzed and studied in the technical analysis occurs in part B, which would in turn allow for an informed engagement process with continued conversations. And this iterative relationship then sort of leads to the development of the visions and the policies in part C. And then it looks like a fairly traditional planning process from that point out, where we're sharing draft versions of the plan, getting more feedback, and eventually finalizing that policy language and adopting the plans. So getting into our consultants, Seva Workshop is our lead consultant in the Northgate sub-area plan. They're off to a great start with outreach. Collected hundreds of survey responses at this point. They've posted some interactive exhibits around the neighborhood. Developed an online. They're developing an online story map just to establish some planning history and character of the neighborhood. But crucially, also they're conducting interviews and listening sessions with a variety of historically underrepresented community groups. Recently facilitated in language listening session with 35 or so East African elders in the neighborhood, which was pretty exciting. And agency landscape and planning is our other consultant, lead consultant that we're working with on the other 2 plans, downtown and First Hill Cap Hill. They're based in Boston. They've done innovative work throughout the country, but have done some pretty important local projects as well. The UW Seattle Campus Master Plan, some work in Little Saigon. They've done a few pop-ups and outreach activities here in downtown Seattle that we were excited to hear about, that predated Erica's in my time, but we've benefited from the results of those. And they also stress a robust equity-focused community engagement approach, which we've deeply appreciated. I wanted to briefly focus on one specific PSRC requirement. This is directly from the PSRC checklist for these RGC designated plans. asking that we utilize some sort of innovative equity and engagement tool, again, stressing who was engaged by the plan in addition to the content of the plan and those exercises themselves. So I'm actually going to pass it to Tim, who's our Indigenous planning strategist, as he mentioned, to talk about the work he's doing with Tahoma Peak Solutions.
All right. Hey, y'all. So being a part of this as a sub and now with the city, I think that one of those main goals, right, was really pushing the red and putting that at the forefront and really start working with those communities that the city claims to, it's a bad way to put it, that the city wants to be working with and incorporating with, right? So we have contracted Tahoma Peak Solutions, and they're a great group that created this Indigenous Inclusivity Guide. And that was for our office at OPCD, and it really kind of breaks down the treatment of local tribes and urban Indigenous people of Seattle, and really starts to paint a picture of the importance of including them at the beginning of the planning process versus just at the end, kind of letting them know what's happened, and start really using this to inform a lot of the work that we will be doing, starting this year and beyond.
No, that's
okay. Great.
Yeah, but I appreciate that, Tim. And we'll actually transition to Erica for the remainder. But Tim is going to stick around for questions if you want to ask about that at the end. But Erica, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, guys. As has been mentioned by Jesse, there's following this RET engagement process, we're going to be doing a technical analysis approach for all of the urban centers based on these key themes, of which every one of you touches upon. So I really want to make sure that I'm going to kind of speed through these next slides because I want to make sure that we have time to talk about this process with you all and get your feedback on how we can best kind of integrate some nuanced approaches to this work. But I think the previous slides and the work with the Tahoma Peak Solutions and with Tim's leadership is really a huge step in the right direction of taking the city's process of not only acknowledging the lands that we sit on, but how do we actually plan in alignment with the thinking behind where our lands are based out of. So moving on to the next, BAE Urban Economics, which you may or may not be familiar with, is a firm that is doing a lot of our technical analysis work. One of the complicated factors of all of these plans are that not every consultant is doing the same thing on every plan, which makes it really fascinatingly nuanced and very challenging to oversee. But in regards to a quick snapshot of Northgate, Downtown, and Capitol Hill, which are our initial plans, they're going to be largely focused on the economic conditions, housing, and the public services as they stand. Again, of course, looking at how those things need to be supported in order to account for the growth that the comp plan demonstrates is going to happen in these areas. Next slide. University of Washington, which a couple of you are very well integrated with, is actually doing our transportation technical analysis. There are some PhD students who are honestly at the forefront of capturing post-COVID data in this department and are able to bring forth a lot more usable information because our transportation and movement patterns have changed so much since COVID, particularly in Seattle, which is a very heavily work from home focused culture right now. So while we're going to be using, a lot of data from SDOT and our other transportation partners, UW has done their own analysis examining how we might adapt our systems to better serve this new pattern of movement that we're seeing across our sub-areas. Next slide. And then, as Jesse mentioned, agency landscape and planning is going to be our lead on a lot of this work, but they're going to be very focused on the environment, climate change, and adaptation, technical analysis. I'm not going to read through all of these, but really thinking through what services our districts need to provide in order to support a healthy environment and make for a more livable and sort of enticing experience for those that are going to be moving into these areas as the years progress. And then the reason for Radhika's departure, Seva is going to be working closely with us on land use and housing technical analysis, both looking at the existing conditions. For both of those, they're also, as Jesse mentioned, doing a large lift of the engagement process in Northgate, bringing to the table those who haven't been heard traditionally in these processes, and are going to be looking at how we might meet some of our housing needs in a more creative way. Yep, I'm going to leave it at that. And then, as we mentioned, Seva's been doing a lot of outreach and engagement in both areas, but we've also had some really fun projects of capturing how really a big part of this is how downtown meets the needs of everyone. We have very differing urban centers, some that really meet the needs of those people who live and work immediately within it. And then we have downtown, which is a place where we have to represent and be responsive to all people of Seattle. So what does that look like? How do we all come together in that downtown landscape? And speaking through with our Indigenous community, and then focus on arts and culture, youth, employment, and housing. We've been pulling together these focus groups that are really quite particular in the kind of work that they do, so that those conversations can help shape that technical analysis in a different kind of way. So next steps. To the right, this image here is one of those focus groups, as we mentioned. Just for context, what we're doing right now is some final contract, kind of tidying up loose ends. As I mentioned, this is a very complicated layering of contracts in order to look to use, I would say, sub-consultant strengths for particular areas. We're also diving into existing conditions reports, and then doing outreach regarding those existing conditions, speaking to folks like you all who are very knowledgeable on topic areas. We're focused on developing the framework for the racial equity toolkit for Capitol Hill and First Hill, that because Capitol Hill First Hill is slightly behind the timeline of Northgate and downtown, so we're now moving into that area. And then we're really wanting to create a framework for interagency collaboration. We know that in order for these initiatives to move forward, we need support from SDOT, from OED, from Department of Neighborhoods, really to make sure that folks are aware that we're doing this work, so that we don't miss opportunities and alignment where it exists. Obviously, there's a incredibly challenging WSLI process going on, so how we can touch and integrate into that forever moving target. So, sorry, that was a ton of blabbering, but we again really wanted to focus on the questions for you, and these are just some that came to our mind, but are really happy to take this conversation where you would like it to go and clarify some of the things that we brought up. So we're at the very beginning of this. We have a lot of flexibility. So if there are precedents that you all have worked on, you've seen that really the big part of this is developing what these communities see as their vision for their future, And then it's our job to figure out how to help them get there. So if there are documents, if there are projects that you have come in contact with that you feel strongly present a vision, I would love to hear that from you all. And then we've also, we know just from your intros a little bit about what you're interested in, but we recognize this won't be our first time coming to you all. And if there are topics that would be helpful when we come back to present to you on the intricacies of, we'd love to hear that. And then we know that you're all out in the field doing your work and would love to hear if there have been particular challenges that have gotten in the way of the equity-driven implementation efforts that you all been involved with. We all want to do good work, but we know that there are things that get in our way, and we want to use this opportunity to analyze those challenges and see if we can start to put in place some adaptations to those challenges. And I'll hand it back to you all, however that's meant to happen.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much. So now we move to our clarifying questions. There's a queue in the chat for that. And if you would like to pass, you can pop your name in the chat and say that you would like to pass. Let me get caught up on, okay, Caleb. Passing. Deanna, you would be first.
Erica, Jesse, and Tim, thanks so much for being with us today and for sharing this great update. I think, Erica, you touched on it, and that you all are still working on identifying how to bring in a coordinated, concerted effort with other departments and potentially with Sound Transit. And so I'll just leave it at, I think it'd be very interesting to us to understand, those touch points and coordination strategies for that to be informed by these other departments as they're also working. For example, the relationship with the Seattle Transportation Plan and these sub-area plans is going to be very critical. And so we're interested in understanding how that's going to be integrated as the Seattle Transportation Plan and other plans are being developed. Thank you.
Thanks, Deanna. Jamie?
I'm still formulating my thoughts, so pass and maybe circle back.
Okay, Lauren?
I don't have any clarifying questions. Hi, Erica, Jesse, Tim, good to see you. I do have some topics that I'd like to add to a queue, but I'm not in the chat, so maybe I'll just say them and then we can group a little bit later. I'm really interested in learning more about the racial equity toolkit, the RET outcomes, and some of the needs of the communities, particularly Indigenous communities, low-income communities, BIPOC communities in these urban centers. And so just maybe we could have a little discussion about some of those early findings later on. I'm also interested in the work you mentioned, Erica, about what the UW's doing and how travel is changing and how that's going to influence strategies for sub-area planning. And then also just how this relates to the City of Seattle's Equitable Development Initiative and equitable TOD planning work. So those are kind of the three buckets I'd love to discuss a little later on after clarifying questions. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Lauren. We'll get back to those after we get through these. Michaela?
Hi, Michaela Daffern. I live in Capitol Hill, and my neighborhood last had a neighborhood plan update in 1998. So I am so excited to see some strategic, kind of thoughtful, future-looking planning happening for my community. And I think the sub-area approach is a better way to do that. So very happy. And I think I missed it. What's the schedule for updating these going forward? So this is a 20-year vision, and then is this going to get done every 10 years, or what's the plan?
Do we answer that now? Sorry, I'm not familiar with that.
Oh, Yes, we're doing
Okay.
clarifying questions.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, whoever wants to fill
Sure.
that.
I'm going back to the slide. Okay, so yeah, the Capitol Hill First Hill plan. We have the team of consultants and identified and mostly signed on. But it is still fairly early doors there. So that's going to be roughly a year and a half. That's what we're working with right now. But it is in our first phase of plans.
Okay, I think what I'm curious about is in the future, like, so is this a one-time activity that's only going to happen now and never again, or when will you come back and do sub-area planning again for these communities?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know if I have a very firm answer to that. I mean, there is a PSRC cadence at that I think the city will be highly motivated to stay on top of in order to continue to qualify for that funding. With that being said, we are doing more than what PSRC asked for with these plans. And as a result of that, there's more time and resources that are being put into those than would be strictly necessary for that. So it kind of depends on a number of factors, like are they going to continue to want to the city as those every 8-10 years or whatever come up, are they going to want to continue to invest at that level in terms of time and effort? And if so, maybe it happens a little more often, maybe that process is a little longer, give or take a year or two. So I don't know if I have like a very firm answer to that, but like I'd say at the bare minimum, I would find it hard to believe that they'll fall out of step with the RGC designation process.
Thanks. Before we go to a question from Andy, while this graphic is up, what does the dotted line box represent?
Oh, sure. So we quickly identified in some initial versions of this timeline that that Erica and I and Tim for all of our powers probably wanted to avoid a situation where we were working on like 4, 5, 6 plans at a time. So this kind of identifies the box illustrates like this zone where if a plan were to finish a little earlier or be pushed out a little later than in that first phase of 3, then those other 2 lines will respond to that. So it basically just shows this sort of, for lack of a better term, danger zone of like, okay, let's keep those other 3 plans out of this box so that they are not like we're not trying to do too many things at once and making sure that we're producing high quality work. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thanks. Andy?
Yeah, hi. One question, multiple part related. I think it's clarifying. How were the 6 sub areas chosen? Who chose them? Does every place eventually get one? Are there equity issues in deciding which areas do and don't get a sub area plan? Thank you.
Well, I think a lot of input went into how they were chosen over years. I mean the urban villages, is a strategy that's what 30 years old now almost, and the urban centers were kind of birthed from that process, and the PSRC RGC designations to a certain extent inspired the identification and like thresholds that we needed to meet within a given sub area in order to pitch them for that process. So I don't think I can speak for everyone that was involved in that process. Are there equity implications? I mean, I personally I would say absolutely. Like there's no accidents in the drawing of boundaries in my opinion. So I would hope that this kind of attention expands. It's that that's always on our radar. I know that they have kicked around the idea of a couple of others, but that they want to add to the same PSRC designation or over the next cycle, but I probably shouldn't talk too much about those right now. But yeah, I mean, that's yeah, those are good points. Well taken.
Julio, did you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you for the presentation. I am wondering, how do you plan to coordinate with other outreach or activities or engagements, events that might be happening in these areas? For example, right now in Capitol Hill, at least in part of Capitol Hill, there is an emergency preparedness group, which is seeking outreach, doing engagement. Are you looking to partner with such small focus organizations or activities, or will you be for one more community that drop what they're doing, pay attention, so on and so forth?
I think I caught that. I was a little choppy on my end. I'm sorry, but we're sort of in that phase where we are part of our RET analysis, and Jesse and Tim, please interrupt me if I speak incorrectly, is doing an assessment to sort of kind of capture what other folks are doing in these neighborhoods. We also are trying to partner with local organizations who know more about what's happening in Capitol Hill. We're working with eco districts, Capitol Hill eco districts, and they've done a lot of work in that area and know a little bit more of the players and what's happening, because we recognize that we as 3 people cannot possibly be aware of everything that's happening in all of these areas. But in every conversation, we're hoping to fill a little bit more of these gaps. So when we go into every focus group, it always ends with like, who else should we talk to, in hopes that we can keep filling and filling. But this is, again, we're still in that very initial phase where it's all about capturing what is of interest to study. And then there'll be a much more heavy engagement process that occurs later on, after that technical analysis has been underway. So we're hoping to reach as many folks as we can. But again, this is one of those places where we absolutely love to hear if there's folks that we may not be aware, so that we can engage with them.
And while we kind of have a moment of silence, I would like to kind of maybe expand on that a little bit, especially with those. I'm glad that was brought up, because we are looking to engage with the groups that haven't necessarily had a voice in these communities, and in these spaces. So that's been at the forefront, and finding out who those folks are, and working to get them to come to the table, which is, we've had a really good success rate in doing up to this point. And I wish I had remembered to include this graphic. It's that there's going to be multiple times we're engaging throughout the entire process of this, and returning that as more of a discussion versus this is what we're telling you. We're really trying to get rapport with the communities that this is really trying to focus on, those underserved and less heard folk, and making sure that we're on the right track to be able to create a more equitable community for them.
Thanks. So I think what we want to do next is continue to build our list of topics to talk about. If you have a quick comment, maybe just make that comment. If it's a topic area to dig in a little bit, then maybe we add it to our list that Lauren started for us. And Deanna, you're at the top of that list, I think. Maybe yes, I think that's the right list. Do you have anything to add to the discussion topic list, or a quick comment? Let's see. Jamie?
Are we structuring this like by Lauren's list? Is that the plan? So are we starting on the
well,
top?
I was just gonna see if we have other topics to add to the list.
Oh, okay. I like Lauren's topics.
Okay. Caleb? Michaela?
Pass.
Monica?
Pass.
Rick?
We're adding topics?
Yeah.
I don't know whether this is really a topic, but I'm curious. If you look at these different urban centers, they're different from one another. One in particular is very different from the others, which is Northgate, given the fact that it has 4 publicly owned blocks that is currently a surface parking lot directly adjacent to the station, and it's been that way for quite some time. And I'm wondering if there's a different approach that's being taken to Northgate than the other sub areas.
I mean, I think maybe Tim and Erica have more to say on this, but our intent is that all of these plans are going to look quite different from one another. I mean, I think those that you know, that border each other maybe have some additional relationships, but like, yeah, I mean, our intent is that they all look quite different because they are comprised of different stakeholders. You know, bit of a cop out of an answer, but like Northgate, you know, has its own issues that you've outlined there that will make it a different plan. And also, it's the Indigenous Inclusivity Guide that was developed as part of that it has a lot to has a proportionally like larger impact on that on the genesis of a lot of that plan as well. So Erica, Tim, others things to add?
I know, Tim, maybe you would want to jump in before I do, actually.
Yeah, I was just going to build on that. Yes, Northgate is kind of like the odd one out of the 4. But to what Jesse was talking about, is that racial equity means a different thing in downtown as it does in Northgate. So we're all looking at different things, and we're not using the same toolkit as we are for each sub area. Each is developed in its own right, and then we're basing that off on community need, and then who we really need to direct our attention to. So Northgate, and for itself, is we're looking more at than partly because of me and the excitement of what I've been working on, but as an Indigenous neighborhood aspect to this, because there's a lot of room for housing, and it's zoned for that already. So what does it look like when we try to approach this through an Indigenous lens in trying to develop community? And Northgate in itself is another odd one too. Is like, who is that community out here? What do those groups look like? Are they robust? Are they like they are what you would if you would approach Capitol Hill? They're not, right? So it's really trying to, again, we have amazing subs that are doing that groundwork and working with those community groups to figure out, well, what's the narrative look like here, and where do we need to start pushing this in terms of what the community is actually trying to say.
Lauren, that seems to touch on your first topic. Is there more you'd like to tease out about this conversation?
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Tim. This is Lauren. It sounds like y'all are at the very beginning, and so it's okay if there's like nothing like actually actively to share. Like you're convening these conversations, you're mapping the community, you're like establishing those. I mean, you're probably doing the first steps of the REV, which are like, what is the historic context of this neighborhood, and who has been pushed where, who is no longer here, who remains, and how do you center those like impacted communities? So just like interested to stay in touch with that over time for sure. And then as you start hearing from these voices that you are intentionally taking from the margins and putting right at the center of these processes, like this body is like very interested in hearing those visions for the future, the supports these community members need to thrive in some of our densest, most urban neighborhoods. You know, it's like when I think about regional centers, specifically these four, you know, they're wild places. You know, it's like how does community happen and is it created there? And they're the places that see the highest pressures, I think, in our city, some of like development pressures, housing types. And so when you're really centering the needs of those that experienced either the greatest housing cost burdens, the greatest, you know, transportation cost burdens, like all of that, I'm just so interested in the outcomes those communities want to see in these really unique neighborhoods where Seattle is funneling all of our growth to these places. And how do you center the needs of our most vulnerable communities in these places? So really appreciate the Equity Forward process and the team, the consultant team too, that you have built to ensure that happens. So anything that you would want to share around like early outcomes, or, you know, what you are hearing from people. And then I think we need like a complete other briefing on the Indigenous Inclusivity Guide, because that sounds so interesting, Tim, and we'd love to have you back for that. So feel free to respond to any of that.
I'm just going to jump in and say that I think the question I think Michael asked is pretty valuable in this arena, that part of what we're doing as a plan based on, you know, a regional growth and the land use of these areas is doing an analysis of what is publicly owned space in these districts. And I think through the work we're doing to bring forth, and like you said, centering that, you know, what the communities most at risk need, is developing a really strong correlation of like, this is what these communities are saying they're needing, and this is the space that's owned by our public entities, and how can that space better serve them? How might we actually utilize our public lands in order to meet these equity principles that we talk a lot about? And so I think that that's an area both in Northgate and in downtown, actually, where there's a lot to explore, and a lot that we're lucky enough to have other teams and other policy and land use minds working around us to kind of brainstorm that with.
Just to clarify, Erica, are you only seeing publicly owned rights of way and parcels as the change agents in these plans, or okay, good.
Yeah, no, I just think that they offer a pretty remarkable opportunity in those two particular areas, because there's so much of it.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Jamie?
Michaela, were you gonna like respond like clarifying information, or were you gonna ask more questions? I just don't want to like ruin the flow if you were gonna.
I was gonna react to the public realm kind of comment or theme. Are you gonna comment on that?
No. Maybe I'll just go first then.
Yes, please go first.
Okay. I'm really glad, because I was going to bring up this piece about how different Northgate is from all of these other ones. That also being kind of my neighborhood, like I'm in that area all the time. I also found the comment one of you made about, you know, none of these boundaries are accidents is also super fascinating to me, because you've got this like weird little squiggle up to like Northwest Hospital I just, that area is changing so rapidly. It's also why I was looking at the overlay of like the displacement risk index map and these areas, and one of my questions too is around how are we integrating displacement risk? And I know OPCD is working on a whole displacement framework as well. So how is that going to be integrated or taken into consideration with each of these sub-area plans. But I think Northgate in particular has displacement is a huge concern, especially when you look at it's a very diverse area. The farther and farther north you go, like, well, once you pass Northgate up, it like gets more and more diverse again. And it's also an area where there's that huge project that's going to happen just on the other side of Northgate Way that is like what they call now like naturally affordable housing. And I know there was some proposals in place for a while for that to like really shift dramatically. And it's also an area that is the regional transit hub for like all of North King County, because that's where the light rail ends right now. And so literally there are people driving in from Lake Forest Park and from Bothell and from Linwood to like get in the light rail to get into downtown for their jobs. And so my other question is about how you're going to incorporate like the opening of future light rail stations and into those like transit patterns, and knowing that like even though we're planning for this particular neighborhood, it is seeing huge influxes of commuters that are coming in from North King County that aren't even necessarily Seattle residents, and how that kind of affects your overall planning when you think about that. So connections to displacement, the racial, I'm curious about the racial equity toolkit analysis work that's happening, and then the this piece about connections to broader King County and transit patterns. So that's my thought.
I mean, there's a reason this is identified as a regional center, right?
100%.
So we're getting tight on time. Michaela had something. I just want to make sure we can address those other topics too. If there's something quick from the OPCD folks in response to that, okay, but otherwise I'd like Michaela to go ahead. Thanks.
I'll jump in
I was
here.
gonna.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna kick to Jesse and Tim because they're doing the transportation components, but I that was a wonderful summary of some of the complexity of Northgate. So thank you.
We can address that if we have the time. I'd like to hear what Michaela has to say.
Okay. Capitol Hill and First Hill have really, really, really special public life and public spaces as well. So when you're thinking about kind of what elements to prioritize, don't just think of downtown and the university district are those places with those key opportunities. In areas that are really dense in our city, a lot of us live in multifamily buildings. We don't have decks. We have to go outside of our front doors to actually exist outside. And so the quality of that public space matters so much. First Hill doesn't have enough parks, but First Hill is also home to one of the most amazing parks in the whole city, which is Freeway Park. And in my neighborhood, we dine outside, we hang out in parks together because that's where we can play, and our sidewalks are where we interact and we bump into our neighbors, and it's where we build community. So that's like that's the way that that's one of the things I would love to see prioritized in our sub-area planning. And I'll drop a link into some work that was sponsored by SDOT and the University of Washington that Capitol Hill Eco District did around the public life, public realm plan. Thank you.
Okay, let's see. We had the next topic was the UW travel pattern analysis. Downtown,
Yeah.
post-COVID, etc.
Absolutely. So, and this will we can return to the Northgate stuff as well, right? And like that usership of space. I will pass this off to Jesse after I talk for a few minutes here on the reason why UW was picked was just because they're one of the groups. They did the Commute Seattle, of course, and they are one of the few groups that has post-COVID data, which I think will be really come important when evaluating these spaces, these sub areas that we're looking at. And they're able to, right now they're formulating based off that scope of work that we showed, and getting questions that will really help pinpoint these areas on what people are doing, how are they getting to downtown, when they're getting to downtown, and just overall usership. So I think the question that you brought up earlier is like, well, currently Northgate is being used by 2 counties in trying to commute down into Seattle. And once we start developing this a bit more, we are working with SDOT as well. Ben Smith and Ben Rosenblatt. In the past, SDOT has put a person on with these sub-area spaces to work along with OPCD. So we're in the process of doing that. Ben Rosenblatt is working with the downtown, and as we start to progress in this, we'll have our own SDOT person for each sub area that will ultimately become important in looking at, and then teaming up with this UW team that has this unique set of data. I believe it's around 75,000 responses, which is just a huge data pool, or a group that we can be pulling data from that will become ultimately important in developing the narrative of these spaces. Because again, Northgate's completely downtown than completely different than say downtown and Capitol Firstdale, and being able to show what is actually really going on there. And I'll pass it off to Jesse because he will be the transportation lead.
Sure, Tim. I think you summarized that portion of the scope really well. So I don't have a ton to add, but I'll say that yeah, the Commute Seattle data does include a pretty robust volume of responses that includes origin and destination. So like we should be able, and of course the type of mode that they're using. So that should be able to help us to identify some of these more regional trips that go outside of Seattle, outside of the county, et cetera, to an extent. But that should help with that. The other part of the UW scope that we haven't talked about yet is the parking management strategies that they're looking to. The city and the county have great parking supply and utilization data, and also the data on the users to sort of help to inform some of the equity, more equity focused conversations around parking and other modes of transportation. So yeah, we haven't really started running with them yet in terms of like getting that part of the project moving. We really just had our introductory calls with those 2 groups at SDOT and UW, but yeah, for all the reasons Tim outlined, excited to get started.
So Deanna had a quick question to follow up on that, Jesse.
Thanks, David and Jesse. Just as you're having those conversations, Jesse, what I would recommend is to also loop back in terms of the assumptions for the growth forecast of travel with PSRC. Something that you may know already, but if not is important, is that the travel demand model PSRC uses for the region has a very important assumption, and that is that road usage charges will be in effect. And RUC, as it's for its acronym, what it does for a travel demand forecast model is that it lowers the demand, assuming that in fact RUC is going to be in place. Our concern, and we've been mentioning this both for the Seattle Transportation Plan and the comprehensive plan efforts, is that that is a very bold assumption, given that we know how complex and challenging politically it is to implement RUC. And so what this may tend to happen is that we're underestimating the actual amount of cars on the street and vehicle miles traveled, and therefore how we might assume how to accommodate all those trips by car in the sub-area plans. So I'm mentioning this just because you might want to consider in your exercises with UW how you might have some bookend analysis between whether the RUC gets implemented or doesn't. And for that, I would recommend that UW works hand in hand with PSRC's modeler for that, for the estimating.
Okay, I think we got one more. Go.
Hey, this is Zio. I just wanted to touch on the downtown piece before we wrap up. I don't live downtown, but I've been working downtown since 2021. And I think it also is, I mean, all of these neighborhoods are very complicated. But I think the boundary line that I observe being drawn for Seattle downtown regularly gives me a little bit of pause, because it's trying to capture so many different ideas about what the central convening place of Seattle should be. And I think it was mentioned that downtown's supposed to be for everyone, but I think there's also a couple of distinct neighborhoods like the ID where I think that it should maybe be for a subset of the city first and then for everybody. And I'm just really interested in how it's being approached differently than other neighborhoods that are kind of considered more residential. There's more people living in downtown now than there were pre-pandemic, but I think there's also a lot of elements of the neighborhood that are missing compared to some of our residential neighborhoods. And I noticed in the BAE urban economics slide that there isn't a piece in there around public service considerations. And so I'm just interested to see how downtown gets treated like more as like a proper, true neighborhood that people live in, and less as like a destination site for people to work and play only in.
Yeah, I think that's a super important question. And is it okay if I answer now? I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure.
Doing that. Okay.
It's always good.
Okay. I think it's a really important point, and I think that, you know, there's been a lot of discussion and a lot of agreement that in order for downtown to be more economically stable in the way that we move forward, it should allow for more residential use. And there's a lot of discussion about conversions and what have you. But the fact of the matter is, as you mentioned, there's a lot of missing factors in how Seattle's downtown does serve its residential population. And so I think that will be a big facet of I think how all of those pieces come together. If we look at land use, we look at housing, we look at space, how can we create policies that help support residential development in proximity to the services that we have, and then identify the areas where other services need to be further supported. I know that's a very loose answer, but it's definitely something that's top of our mind. And I'd also want to recognize the fact that the ID versus Pioneer Square versus Belltown, you know, versus the sort of retail core are all, they could have their own sub-area plans. So the idea of actually bridging these is complicated, and I think we'll have some very, very much nuance in our approach.
Thank you. This has been a really great overview of this amazing chunk of work. And I get the sense that there are a lot of us who would really love a chance to dig into each one of these sub areas as you move along. So I hope we get a chance to do that. Thanks again for being here. Now we're going to shift over to a briefing on the climate change response framework. And I'll let you, our friends from SDOT, from OSE, and from OPCD, please introduce yourselves and take it away.
Thank you, John. This is Radcliffe Dakenai again from Seattle Department of Transportation. I'm a principal planner in the Policy and Planning group. And I will be presenting the climate change response framework that's just been recently released. And I'll just pass my word quickly to Michael Hubner, who is also working, collaborating with us on the STP and the comp plan.
Good afternoon. I'm Michael Hubner, Long Range Planning Manager in the Office of Planning and Community Development and leading up the comprehensive plan update effort, and which will include a new climate element and a transportation element that certainly overlaps with what Radcliffe is going to be talking with you about today. Edie from OSC, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, and I'm in the room. Edie Gillis, I use she, her pronouns. I work with the Office of Sustainability and the Environment. My title is citywide climate coordinator, so I work closely with other departments as they implement their climate efforts.
Thank you all so much for being here. So Radcliffe, you're going to do the presentation?
Yes, I will take over the screen if I may. Just bear with me one moment. Okay, 1 second here. Oops, starting on the wrong. You can see the whole show. All right, can everybody see the screen?
Yeah. Yes.
Opening slide. All right. Again, Radcliffe Deck and I from the Seattle Department of Transportation. Thank you for having me here to give you a quick briefing on a recently released climate change response framework. This has been a long time coming, but we've started way back in 2019 talking about this to see how we might create sort of a climate-focused transportation effort that aligns with the work that we're doing with our colleagues in OSC, Seattle City Light, and at OPCD, and working with the comp plan.
Hey, Radcliffe, we're currently getting the presentation view plus your notes and all, but do you want to do the slide view?
Let me see. Hold on 1 second. You're getting a different screen there, I guess. Can you see that? How about we do it this way?
Look, we can see it.
A little better, yeah.
Okay.
Radcliffe, I think
not quite as teeny.
If you click on the full screen on the slide view right there, click on that.
Right. If I do that,
that should work. There you go.
Oh, you got it.
There you go.
Okay.
Teams is glitchy. So.
You don't see the notes now. Okay.
Right. And we can actually read the slide. Thanks.
Excellent. Okay. Really just want to share with you the context, the opportunity of this effort, and then talk about how it centers on community benefits, some of the solutions that we're proposing, and how we're going to be implementing this plan through SDOT and with our partners. But just again, quick overview, it really is a way for us at SDOT to have a focused way of addressing climate. So context setting and the opportunity. There's been a lot of work already, as you all know, on climate. There was a climate action plan that OSC put out way back in 2013, and the equity and environment agenda a few years later in 2015, 2016. More recently, Mayor Harrell signed $6.5 million in 2022 for the Green New Deal Opportunity Fund. And then more recently, the Washington House Bill 1181 came out saying that when we update our comp plans, that we need to talk about VMT or put it in front, vehicle miles traveled, and put that front and center of how we're going to do that. And then In December of 2022, executive order from Mayor Harrell, the One Seattle Climate Justice Actions to Reduce Emissions from the Transportation Sector. Long title, but had over 20 plus actions. One of them including deliver the climate change response framework. But it also had deliver low pollution neighborhoods, make permanent some healthy streets, among other things, launching electrification pilots at SDOT. So a number of things to keep the momentum on our efforts to reduce emissions. But all that to say, it is part of the climate work and equity work together. So this is a continuation of the many efforts that have been happening, and then putting it under the umbrella of One Seattle, climate justice agenda. Again, to deliver an equitable clean energy economy, just transition away from fossil fuels, and for outcomes that are delivering healthy and resilient communities. So just to set a little bit more context on the problem, and you've probably seen this slide, I've given it a number of times, but 2/3 of our emissions are coming from the road transportation sector. And much of that is coming from single occupancy vehicles. So essentially, SOV driving is the biggest challenge that we face. And how do we bend that curve of reducing vehicle miles traveled to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? The opportunity that we see is that, we understand from some of our analysis that a lot of trips are relatively short, and many of those are made in cars. And knowing that, many of them are under 3 miles, those trips could be made by walking, cycling, and transit, or other zero emission ways of getting around. And part of that is if we made it more inviting to do those things, if we made it safer to do those things. So there's definitely that opportunity that we want to take advantage of. We know that people are still going to need to drive, but we want to be able to offer many more options so that driving isn't the first priority that people take. And then the other challenge here in bending the emissions curve is, when we started looking at this again in 2019, basically revisiting the climate action plan and what the goals were, we were asked, how are we doing? And as you can see, the blue line is pretty flat. We have a goal of the climate action plan says 82% reduction of passenger vehicle emissions by 2030. Very ambitious goal. Through our climate calculator work in the climate change response framework, we realize that's probably very difficult to do. We would pretty much have to stop doing a lot of our moving around. Our current trajectory doesn't get us much lower. With the climate change response framework, we get to a recommended pathway that gets us partway to where we need to go, but still very much a challenge. And our statement is we need to be aggressive and to accelerate a lot of the things that we're doing already. So much of what we're proposing isn't, I would say, new, but it's turning up the volume on a lot of the work that we're doing and leveraging the work together to make enough change to bend that curve. So the effort we have is centering our on community benefits. The CCRF is aligning with existing core values at SDOT around safety, equity, sustainability, mobility, livability, and excellence. I'll focus on the first two on safety and equity, in that a lot of the things that we do around Vision Zero and safety work complement the things that we would be doing for climate work as well. And on, similarly with equity, when we're improving opportunities to improve transit, improve safety for accessing schools, everyday places that we need to get to, that's addressing equity as well. So 5 things that we're focusing around community benefits, making sure that our transportation system is helping to deliver cleaner air in our neighborhoods, create more opportunities for economic revitalization, leveraging the work that we do on safety to make our streets safer, to invite people to walk more, cycle more, and take transit. And all of this provides households opportunities to save money. Save money by not having to pay for gas as often as they would otherwise. And then opportunities to be more active in the way they get around. So there's some health benefits in that way as well. We also took a look at and estimated what the co-benefits are from dollar valuation. So for every dollar invested in sort of these climate actions, if you will, there are about $8 to $10 in co-benefits related to safety, health, and neighborhood economic benefits. We get a question or a comment about, all of these things that you would propose can sometimes idle or delay vehicles, and there's a lot more idling, so there would be a lot more pollution. We would agree to that statement to somewhat, but the marginal increase in pollution from vehicles that are in congestion are, I would say, are small, and they're significantly offset by the reduction in the miles driven if people are switching to riding transit and to riding bikes or even walking. So all of the mode shift and reducing vehicle miles traveled have such a greater impact on and outweigh and offset the increases in emissions from the delay. Okay, we'll move into the solutions that we're proposing, and all of these are feeding into the Seattle Transportation Plan. None of this is going to be a surprise to any of you. It's really just about expanding and accelerating the work that we're already doing under, again, the focus of delivering healthier and safer and more equitable neighborhoods, and ultimately healthier and safer and more equitable city. So we categorize the solutions into 6 strategies. Creating a culture of climate action and optimism. So this first one is really moving away from the doom and gloom conversation of climate and being able to speak more positively about it, that we all have a role to play in it, and working with our partners, with different communities, and even internally of how we can transition to what we need to do and do it as fast as we can. The next few sort of all align with one another. Make short trips safer, more affordable, and zero emission. This leads to also, hey, let's make our transit much more reliable, affordable, and have a much better experience in doing that, so that people would continue to ride transit. Enable the use of climate-friendly travel choices. This could just mean creating more access, 15-minute cities, or being able to work from home now and again. Improve freight efficiency. We've got, electrify freight vehicles or transition them to cleaner fuels. and working with the private sector to ensure that transition can happen within the freight industry. There's opportunity also for e-cargo bikes to play a larger role in our urban goods delivery. And then for pretty much everything else that's going to continue to need to move. I mean, electrify cars, electrify bikes, electrify anything that has a combustion engine at this point. So that last one is really about electrify, 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 or transition to some other clean fuel that helps us reduce our emissions. This just speaks to a little bit more in detail of what those actions could be within those categories. And I'll send out this deck so that you can see all of that. And then also I'll share out a link to the actual climate change response framework. And then within the framework, there's this is just an example of some of the summary sheets, cut sheets of what those actions are and what their impacts could be, and how they have and what kind of community benefits they deliver. So this is on bus-only lanes. We've also got how we might support freight electrification, so working with our partners at OSC and delivering some of this future opportunity. And then the potential outcomes of this CCRF. This is the chart that's been getting a lot of press lately. And really how we go from, when we at a baseline 2019 to 2030, what this transition could look like. A lot more cycling, a lot more people walking, transit more than doubles, electric vehicle uptake is quite a bit, but there is still driving that's happening, but a lower proportion than it is today. This is caveated heavily in that there's a lot of things that might need to happen for that to happen. Electrification is going to play a big role, but you see here there's pricing and curbside management, our collaboration with our partners at OPCD and comp planning, and making sure the land use complements the transportation investments that we're talking about in the Seattle Transportation Plan. So all of these things play a role, and I think one of the main things that we're trying to do with this climate change response framework is to say we need to do all of these things, and we need to do a lot of them. It can't be just electrification, and it can't just be mode shift. It's a combination of both. So implementing the climate change response framework, these are informed by other plans and other goals, transportation equity framework goals, Vision Zero, and then also the transportation electrification blueprint. Those all inform the climate change response framework, which then feeds into the Seattle Transportation Plan. And a lot of what's in the Seattle Transportation Plan, as we're working with our colleagues who are working on the comp plan, so sort of all of it is beginning to nest together as it feeds into the comp plan. The CCRF is reflected in the Seattle Transportation Plan. You can see it here in some of the sustainability goals and the high-level moves. So it's nice to already see that transition, and we're taking in still more comments, or seeing the comments that we've received, and begin to weave some more of that into these efforts and clarify. We've received some comments that it's air quality focused, but what about water quality? So those are some other things that we need to take into consideration as well. And then at the end here, just final few slides, really about the implementation of the SURF, just taking these principles of, and these really could be applied to a lot of the work that we already do about how we use this to lead and inspire and talk about the change that we need to make, and talk about climate with positivity, expand our capacity internally within SDOT to deliver climate actions. It isn't, we want to normalize it. It isn't just a specialty side thing that a few of us do, but it's something that happens across all of SDOT. And then, as I talked about earlier, we need to be able to deliver as fast as we can all of these projects that we need to do to accelerate mode shift and accelerate adoption of electric vehicles. And then push for the necessary rules and regulations to go beyond the carrots, but we need a lot more sticks to help make this happen. And then this work to inform funding opportunities and an approach to pay for this transition that we need to make. And then to continue to measure and report. I'm happy to say that we've just started working with a software company that's helping us better tell the story around VMT. And so I think that's we'll be able to share that out as part of the update to the STP and have clear metrics and measures around vehicle miles traveled reduction and what our future targets might be. And then finally, just communicating our approach publicly. This is really about switching our mindset from this is a dire challenge to we've all got a role to play in this, and being able not to only just communicate it to the choir, if you will, but we need to be able to talk about climate without talking about climate to people who aren't on board yet. So I think this is one of our biggest challenges. And so be empathetic, innovative, and practical in the way we deliver solutions, and then understand that everybody can be a climate champion and they've got a role to play. And you know, one of our taglines here is just take the next step with us, that you can be a partner in making this happen. This is really just for internally what we're doing at SDOT, you know, capitalizing on this release, sharing it internally with all of our divisions, and again, making this part, normalizing it as part of our culture, doing conversations and expanding our knowledge sharing on development of climate tactics, very similar to our equity tactics that we've done in the recent years. We're exploring some workshop opportunities and training others to be aware and how to talk about climate, and again, talk about climate without talking about climate, that it's not only me and a few of my other colleagues who have been working on this, but it's really happening across the board, all across SDOT. So it might not be me next time who's presenting to all of you in the Planning Commission when we're talking about climate. And then continuing to work closely with our equity team and making sure that as we roll out these efforts, it's done equitably and being mindful of who is impacted and who benefits from all of this work. All right, and I'll close with this slide, and that there's no single answer that will solve all of our future problems. There is no magic bullet. Instead, there are thousands of answers, and at least, and you can be one of them if you choose to be. So this is a quote from Octavia Butler that one of our communications folks has suggested to us to say, again, to deliver a positive message around the climate work that we need to do and that we can all play a role in it together. All right, this is the team that's been working on it. Ben Rosenblatt has been the project manager. Michelle Abunaja has been really great with the communications efforts and around positivity. And I've been just continuing to carry this work on from the work that we've been doing since 2019. And so it's finally here. And yeah, so if you have any questions, you can reach me or any of my other colleagues about this. So happy to have a conversation, take any questions.
Great, thanks, Radcliffe. Did OSC or OPCD folks, do either of you want to add something before we get into the questions? You don't have to, I just want to make sure we are covering the bases.
I don't have anything to add.
Okay. So Matt, you're our first clarifying question asker, if you have the
Matt
capacity.
is having some technical issues,
Okay.
David, and I haven't received an email from him, but maybe at the end of the queue, I'll let you know if I've heard anything.
Okay, is Nick able to jump in?
Yes, I just nothing yet. Thank you.
Okay. Julio? Zio?
But I don't know if this is a clarifying question or if it's just a question, but since a significant portion of the strategy is around electrification, how are the teams working on this, working with the electrical providers in our region, or could you clarify like their involvement in this process?
I'll start first, and then I may ask Edie to weigh in as well. But certainly we have a group from Office of Sustainability and Environment, Seattle City Light, and OPCD, and then also even beyond that, members from OED, the Economic Development, and so putting together an IDT from the city to address sort of the electrification transition. It's not all going to happen from the public side, but we have a role to play in it, and then also working with the private sector and making that transition happening. So for example, regulations to make it easier to have electrical outlets or electrification outlets at home or in buildings, so getting them ready to do that. Also thinking about where might we appropriately create more opportunities for charging stations in the right of way. Not always a popular solution as well, but in some cases it makes sense. So those are things that we as a city are grappling with, and then there's efforts at OSC, I know, to help pay for electrification of drayage. Maybe I'll stop there and pass it to you. I don't want to steal her thunder.
I'll just say we feel very lucky to have Seattle City Light as a equal partner in this effort. I think at OSC we spend a lot of time talking with other cities and the struggles they're having in this regard related to their private utilities that they're trying to negotiate with. So having Seattle City Light as sort of an equal city partner has helped us move quicker on a lot of things. So that's awesome. But I also would say all of these city departments that have been involved in the creation of the transportation electrification blueprint, which was not a plan, it really was, what are our goals? Was a collaborative effort. And now all of us, all of the departments are trying to figure out what are the things that we are going to contribute to this, to achieving these goals. And I think, Seattle City Light is of course very focused on, how do we make sure the grid infrastructure is where it needs to be, but then what are the incentives that they're able to provide to businesses and to the public to be able to electrify. So, and then the SURF or the climate change response framework gives SDOT their sort of marching orders or their lane for this effort. And then OSC is focused largely on some of these incentives that can't be provided by the utility. So like the heavy duty truck incentive is a place in which we can play to try to move these efforts forward.
And I might want to chime in just from the comp plan perspective on this. So two things I'd want to emphasize. First is that obviously we're working very closely with both other departments represented here, SDOT, OSC, on our climate related policies, and we're definitely looking at every opportunity to have the higher level policies in the comp plan support a transition toward electrification, both in the right of way and off the right of way, and from the development and land use perspective. And we have a land use element in the comp plan. We have, and then a transportation element, obviously. And then I do want to speak to the city light piece. Is there's a utilities element. So when we're looking, and we're working very closely with the utilities agencies with respect to the element and the technical analysis in the appendix to the comp plan. And it's not just about growth. I mean, the starting point for the comp plan is the city's expected to grow, what are our utilities needs, what improvements need to be made. It's also a question of what are the city's goals toward, in this case, transition off of fossil fuels and what the needs may be there. So you'll see that reflected when we deal with utilities, and City Light has been a partner in that as well.
Great. Jamie, clarifying question?
As your climate person, I have lots of questions, but I'll try to keep it tight. I'm curious about a couple of things. One is what your connections are to the climate preparedness plan at the city and the climate adaptation work. Specifically, I just think there's a huge missed opportunity around co-benefits, instead of framing as co-benefits, but actually how can we have almost like co-solutions where so much of this is also infrastructure that's going to be built, whether that is addressing our streets or our right-of-way, or and so much of that is not approached from a place of how can we reduce urban heat island effect, or how can we create shade coverage, or how can we deal with increased stormwater due to increased precipitation. So I just think there's a huge opportunity to kind of connect those a little better. And I'm curious if you all have looked into that, have started those conversations, and if you considered that in the development of this.
Yes, we've had conversations with our friends at SPU, Public Utilities, and thinking about how we integrate stormwater and storm drainage, and making sure also addressing water quality and emphasizing that a bit more. We do have in the climate change response framework talking about how we can use our increasing the urban canopy to help reduce urban heat island. And so there are already some offshoot projects that we're looking into, and especially in SODO, of how we increase the canopy in that part of the city. But certainly they can be spotlighted a little bit more, and perhaps a cut sheet on them that sort of highlights here are other things that can be done in response to climate and resilience and adaptation.
I had one other quick clarifying question is, I'm curious if you all have considered incorporating the consumption-based GHG model, and if you have looked at embedded emissions in all of this, because I know there's so much more that goes into electrifying our city that has residual impacts, particularly when you look at climate justice from an international perspective, and everything that goes into, you know, all the lithium batteries and all the like. Absolutely. So I'm curious how you've thought about incorporating that thus far.
Yeah, I think in part was the scope of what we were tasked to do. Certainly in looking at scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions and how we break that out. There's other groups already who are looking at sort of a consumption-based tracking. So we're going to partner with those agencies looking at that. King County is doing some of that as well. And I think at the end of the day, transportation is just one part of a broader sort of whole in how we address our sustainability challenge. One of the criticisms of this work has been this is very emissions focused, and emissions is just one part of the whole sustainability pie, if you will. And we acknowledge that, and certainly there's opportunities for us to expand on that and show how this is just, again, one part of a broader challenge that we are trying to solve. And so we're not doing it alone. We're working with our partners at OPCD, with OSC, Seattle City Light, and then also we've just recently had conversations with PSRC on, I overheard you having conversations about the RUC, how that plays into it, and then with King County as well on their goals. So I think there's this document won't solve all of that. I think we can speak a little bit to it, a little bit more about it, but there could potentially be a bigger a document down the road that sort of takes into account all of all of those things that you mentioned. Plug for Edie, maybe an update to the climate action plan.
Deanna?
Thank you. Thanks, Radcliffe. This was fantastic. Great presentation, very easy to follow. I just very grateful of how much information was succinctly and excellently communicated. So thanks for that. Two questions I had, which were just top of mind, related to freight. A lot of the strategies seem not to specifically account or have targets for freight, although kind of embedded there. But even looking at the emissions reductions targets, it's lumped as cars or internal combustion engines, and halving that. I'm just wondering, of that percentage drop that's anticipated, what of that is freight, or what the assumptions are for freight. And then and second is a similar question or suggestion that I made, and I've been bringing up consistently with regards to how these forecasts are accounting for, I'm assuming some of this is using our PSRC travel demand model, and I have the same concern around the suppressed travel assumptions into the future because of RUC. And, if RUC is considered as contributing in one of the strategies in here, I think it would be advisable or useful to understand what that RUC implication would mean in reducing and allowing us to reach our targets. Because if we just blend it into the whole thing, we might have less of an argument to push politically and as policy to make RUC be a heavier contributor to our climate goals. So I think there's a communication strategy that's important there to enable the public to see how important the contribution of a road usage charge would be to these targets. And so curious if that is accounted for or if it could be considered. And so those were two questions. I'm sorry. So one is the freight question in terms of reducing, and the second is how and if you're accounting for RUC specifically as part of these strategies to meet our climate goals.
Right. Admittedly, the freight in here isn't as big of a number that we were addressing. So really, there was almost saying, okay, let's electrify freight. But there's certainly a lot more work that could be done in the freight sector, not just electrification, but I know the port is working on clean transition to cleaner fuels, exploring hydrogen, et cetera. And so all of these things, but we want to be able to work with our freight partners at the port, Northwest Seaport Alliance, the private sector, and what these technologies that they're looking into can help in reducing the freight related emissions. In that first chart I had, again, most of it was passenger vehicles, and freight was a much smaller proportion. But that's not to say that we shouldn't be focusing on freight. Freight still, a lot of diesel is quite dirty, and so there's still an impact that we need to address in the freight sector. It doesn't look like a lot from our analysis, but it is important to us that we continue to collaborate with our partners in addressing those emissions. To your second question about the road user charge, just even how we frame road user charge, right? It's we've had recent conversations with PSRC, with King County and the folks who worked on their recent climate action plan, and yeah, numbers and analysis suggest without some form of pricing, it will be difficult to achieve the emissions reductions, the VMT reductions that look so good on these bending the curve. So I think part of this will be, I think, a better comparison of if you don't do it, and if you do it, and to what extent do you need to do more of it. I think there's, again, some political sensitivity to having that conversation at certain times. So when it's, I think, appropriate, or when we get asked to do more of that, I think we'll be ready to certainly expand on that analysis, and I think also corroborate with our partners who've been doing this work too. And similar data is showing that without some form of and PSRC's work shows the RUC needs to be in place to achieve 2050 vision goals.
Michaela?
Cede the floor to Jamie for another question.
I'll let other folks go and then you can circle back. So I think Matt and David had questions.
Okay, so Matt had a question. EVs are already 5.6% of Washington cars. That has increased 5 times in 3 years and shows no sign of slowing. That the CCRF only ascribed 10% by 2030 is very low compared to the pace of change. Why is it so low?
I think when we did some of our modeling of this, we were conservative in what would be that uptake. Certainly if it's above 10%, since it's already a little bit over 5%, we'll take that. Then that just means other parts of that chart can adjust a little bit more and gives us a little bit more time to do the other parts. But also, it also means we can just keep accelerating, keep pushing, because we need to reduce our emissions as fast as we can. So any amount over 10% by 2030, we'll take it. But certainly there's also, I don't think it's always going to be the straight line up. There's going to be dips and changes. Yeah, so we took a more conservative approach with the numbers that we had.
So my question is, you talked about the fact that there's a whole complex of environmental and other impacts associated with climate change, and that transportation doesn't address them all. And this is largely focused on emissions, though I guess there is a nod to the heat island effect. But there's a whole lot of other areas where transportation comes into play. We're going to have more intense rainfalls and bigger storms, and we have an opportunity to manage some of that stormwater better on our right-of-way. All the information that's been coming out on car tires and how toxic they are, and if we have more rainfall washing more of this stuff into more of our rivers and streams and et cetera, then that's an issue too. So I'm just wondering, and this maybe is an OSE question, but where does that full panoply of transportation impacts and responses get put together? Because it seems like SDOT and SPU could be teaming up right now to be doing a whole lot of things. I know they are doing some, but the pace of change we're talking about is enormous, and I don't see that level of urgency going on. Anyway, so I'm sorry. Please answer.
No, that's a great question, David, and I think to some degree that question can be answered, we need to really stop and take a really hard look at our economy. And our economy is fueled literally by fossil fuels. And how do we take that fossil fuel part out of the economy and still keep our economy going the way we want our economy going? And that's that just transition part out of the fossil fuel economy. Fossil fuels create our tires. So what are other options for tires? And how do we transition to other materials? And I think this is a part of that just transition and looking at different technologies of what may come. I don't think we have the answers to that at the moment, but certainly continuing to work with the private sector and technology shifts to make that happen. But I don't think we were in a position to address a lot of those issues because we just certainly didn't have the tools to address them. But certainly we are thinking about those, especially as SPU continues to push us and say, hey, we've got to think about that because tire pollution is ending up in the sound, and it's not good for us, it's not good for wildlife, it's not good for the fish that's coming out of our waters.
Edie, I think you had something.
Yeah, I can also jump in and say, I think we are on the precipice of having some very incredible opportunities to scale. There is state funding from the Climate Commitment Act, federal funding from BIL, IRA, CHIPS, that are all coming to bear as opportunities for these kind of collaborative efforts that can scale our work. I mean, part of the answer, frankly, between you and me as to why some of these questions aren't answered or aren't embedded within the infrastructure planning work we're doing is because there isn't capacity. And one of the things that OSC is thinking about is how do we use this like once in a generation opportunity for funding to advance some of these projects that we frankly haven't had the capacity to advance. And I think the climate response framework is coming at, the climate change response framework is coming at exactly the right opportunity at the city to then be going for infrastructure grants and climate pollution reducing grants in the transportation sector that we haven't been available or that we haven't had the staff capacity to do in the past. So I think that's a big reason for the climate change response framework in my mind is like, it feeds into the STP, it feeds into the comp plan, and now we can sort of go into overdrive and start making federal and state requests to fund this work.
Thank you. That sounds actually hopeful, which I appreciate. And I would say that the climate change response framework doesn't feed into, but subsumes the STP. I mean, there's more energy, more directed action in this document than we found in that very large STP. But that's an editorial comment. I inadvertently shifted to comments. We want to do that, and I now will defer. And Andy, I think you've got the next comment.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, sort of a common question on messaging. If you get someone who switches from fossil fuel to electric vehicles, says, okay, I've done my part, yet the message you really want is we want them walking, biking, and transits. How do you get the right message? Because the electric vehicle does nothing to reduce, traffic congestion, doesn't do anything to, make it easier to walk or bike or use transit. So it's sort of two messages that are a little bit in conflict. Any comment on that?
I agree when it's like you're saying one thing, but it's going against the other. I think part of this is who can do what transitions can people make right now? For many people, we heard, I'm not going to be able to ride a bike or take transit. It's just, I live in a place that doesn't allow me to do that. Okay, for those populations, let's get you into an EV as soon as you can. And then let's continue the conversation with you of like, how might your neighborhood change, and be willing to do that. So that's the land use aspect, and really meet people where they're at in, I would say, their climate journey. And we don't want to be the ones who are sort of shoving the solutions, but really offering the opportunities that people can take to say, I'm doing my part to make that transition. And then elevate the conversation. Because I think when you go from somebody who is not even necessarily aware, they're concerned, but we're like, well, what can I do? And when you ask them to, okay, we're going to ask you to change your lifestyle overnight and do it. We found that sometimes it's like, oh, I don't even want to talk to you. This is way too hard. I got to go do other stuff. So I think we want to create as many options for people to be willing to take on, and then again, join us in that conversation, because this is going to be a generational problem that we're all going to need to fix. We're having conversations with young people. We're going to have a youth summit early next month, and so really, again, trying to have these conversations and making it be a part of the cultural norm to talk about it and not to shy away from it, because these are going to be it'll be increasingly difficult year after year after year if we're not accelerating that change. Electrification, getting into an EV car is a starting place, and who knows, maybe down the road you might ride a bus 2 times a week instead of driving your EV. So that's our hope in offering a multiplicity of options.
Great. And Michaela had a follow-on comment. Oh, sorry. Was that Edie?
Yeah. I would just jump in too and say there are ways in which the city can make that transition work well for people. And, part of the climate change response framework is acknowledging that those decisions are different depending on your situation. And I often think of how I think of the UPass program when I think about like creating a multifaceted sort of choice rubric, right? The University of Washington knew that they wanted more people taking the bus. So what did they do? They gave everybody a transit pass. They talked about how they were going to make those routes easier. And then they made parking more expensive. So there was kind of this, concoction of a solution that moved people where they needed to be moved. And I think, that's part of the conversation that we need to have over the next 7 years, to 2030, 6 years, to be able to fill out that whole, we were talking about the ruck earlier, but how do we make the transition easy for people? Radcliffe brought up free transit for youth. What are the other things we can be doing with young people that when they turn 16, they aren't thinking about, oh, now I'm a driver. Maybe they get a cool e-bike incentive. Like maybe they get other things that are more a rite of passage in the city of Seattle. So I think there are a lot of opportunities there that frankly, OSC wants to use the Climate Commitment Act funding and the state and federal funding around reducing climate emissions to fund, because we haven't had that opportunity in the past.
Michaela, you had a related comment?
Yeah, so I want to yes and this. I want to appreciate you guys for coming today. You've got people who care a lot and people who want to ask tough questions, and it's really clear that you guys are putting a lot of thought into this, and we have to start somewhere. And you are starting somewhere. So I'm so jamming on all of these ideas. I'm someone who doesn't own a car. And the reason I'm able to do that is because my community and my neighborhood meets my needs. And that choice rubric is so easy for me. But I live in one of the few neighborhoods where that is actually an option for me. And I think I was like about ready to cry when I saw in the graphic that we're only planning to increase walking by 3%. Because I am hoping and expecting to see it in our comprehensive plan when it's released, a vision where we're creating neighborhoods all across Seattle where you can get your groceries and your doctors and your transit, that all of the things are there for you to walk to, so you can actually let that car go. And if we're only reducing it by 3%, I'm pretty scared about what growth strategy we're angling towards with our comprehensive plan, because that is one thing that is within the Seattle's control to move this and accelerate this is in this planning cycle. That needs to be a priority. Otherwise, we're not going to get there. So I hope Michael Hovner's still on the line. High hopes.
I am still on the line. I heard that loud and clear. And I know that wasn't a question, but I do want to clarify that the graphic that and the analysis that Radcliffe shared with you was not predicated on any kind of a preview of the growth strategy. But I do, and I do, I guess it is in partial answer to the last question, which is that it's not all about individual travel choices. It's also about the environment, the neighborhood context within which people can live, which makes it easier to make choices to walk or to bike. So we hear you, and that's part of the larger picture. Thank you.
Vanessa, will you please read Matt's comment?
Yes. Matt is anguished that he can't comment because he's having technical issues, but he says to get to our goals, we need to convert our city in the same way Brussels has over the past 15 years, pedestrianize much of downtown, which is nearly car-free, bicycle highways, low emission zones, complete mass transit, trains, metro, etc. There is nothing in the STP that suggests we're going to get there in essentially 6 years. So he just wanted to say that. And I think we can just go on.
I appreciate the comment and hear him loud and clear.
Thank you, Radcliffe.
Let's see. Was there
Jamie then Michaela?
Jamie, Michaela.
I just want to echo some of what Michaela said of some yes ands. I really appreciate the focus on kind of making transit more convenient, reliable, affordable, the focus on kind of making all of those things more accessible. A couple of things for your consideration here, just based on what I've been hearing and some of the responses is, one, I think language and how we present things really matters, and framing it as like even the title of the report of Climate Change Response Network framework kind of implies a much more comprehensive document. And so I would think about, even if you're like, I don't want to make a really long title, like even a subtitle of some sort that like gives a little bit more specificity of why you're choosing to make it a mitigation focused plan and why you're focusing on certain pieces. And I think that would be helpful. The other thing, even though the focus is primarily on mitigation, I do think that having some sort of acknowledgement about the connections to other plans and to, disproportionate access to these things like the comp plan and STP. I know STP's already mentioned, but I just think like acknowledging where you have the opportunity to acknowledge it so that people are like, oh yeah, I know they're thinking about it, even if it's not like, here's an action about it. The other thing is the order with which you present things. It just really stood out to me that under the Electrify Seattle portion, the very first thing is electrifying personal vehicles. And I'm like, even just like flipping the order of that and putting that last and doing like electrifying public transit, electrifying freight, electrifying, like, I think makes a difference in terms of the message we send of where we are prioritizing our actions. Like, even if that's not the intention, that's kind of how it gets communicated, is like our primary focus is on single occupancy personal vehicles. And I'm sure that's not the intention. Let me know if it is, but, but I'm sure that's not the intention. So just like how it gets presented, I think would be helpful. And then I think lastly, kind of connected to what Michaela was saying about like every neighborhood, you know, this vision for Seattle, it's going to look really different. Like some neighborhoods are much easier to be able to be walkable and make walkable, or to have easy access to transit, and for folks to, and you've acknowledged this already, I know, a couple of times, but I think some sort of thing to clearly draw those connections to the comp plan and the potential there explicitly would be great. And then the very last thing I wanted to say, you've said this in a couple of places. I read through the I skimmed through all 82 pages, and one of the things I picked up on was this climate justice definition, and where it is framed as just like, you know, here's climate justice and here's our 2 sentences on it, saying, you know, it means the benefits of climate action are provided to people disproportionately impacted by climate change, while the burdens and responsibilities for addressing it are taken on by groups and communities who can more easily afford to do so. I just read that for the rest of the commissioners' sake, but in other places, you explicitly name co-creation and climate justice, and without that context, this feels a little bit like, oh, we're going to go help all these people, and it kind of takes the ownership piece out of it, and a opportunity to work with folks on those solutions. And yes, the burdens will not fall on frontline communities, but there needs to be some sort of ownership and inclusion in that process, which I know gets mentioned later, but it gets lost in this when it's just pulled out by itself like that. So I wanted to flag that.
All right, Rose, take us home.
Hey, yeah, so I'm trying to frame this. My brain's a little scrambled right now, but so when I skimmed through the CCRF, the Climate Change Response Framework, and I saw, you know, references to the Transportation Equity Framework and, you know, comments here and there about racial equity and other types of climate justice, the document still didn't feel strong or explicit enough in my mind, though, especially when I then skimmed back to the Transportation Equity Framework and was like, like I'm still unclear about how these strategies are actually playing out, especially the ones that were supposed to be started in like 2022, 2023. We now have like 2+ years where these strategies are supposed to be implemented, but no clear, explicit reference as it relates to climate change response. So I guess my comment is, how do you expect that level of detail to actually show up in implementation? And are there ways we can make the framework itself more explicit?
The Transportation Equity Framework more explicit?
Well, no, I want the climate change response framework to be more explicit, because I feel like there was a reference, oh, it's going to be based, we're going to use strategies in the transportation equity framework.
Got it,
and then there's like light mention here and there throughout, but I didn't really feel like I understood where exactly Seattle is going to focus to get, you know, the most change applied equitably. Does that make sense?
I think that was intentional in that, you know, we worked with our colleagues who are leading up the Transportation Equity Framework, and I'm actually a chairperson, co-chair of the Transportation Equity Framework. So we didn't want to basically take a lot of what was already in one document and transplant it in another. So we've you know, met with the transportation equity work group folks, the community members, and bringing this document to them and making sure that things that they've talked about in the transportation equity framework are reflected enough in here, and that there's enough internal coordination as part of the work in delivering this. You know, as part of a version 2.0, if it makes sense to, and I think this is part of sort of the just transition conversation of bringing even the two terms together, right? climate work and equity work back together. And I think in some ways in the last 10 or 15, even 20 years, those two pieces have come apart from this umbrella of what it means to be sustainable, being able to meet our needs today and also for the future generations to be able to meet their needs. So I've seen it over the last 2-3 decades of how that's transitioned out, where we focused on pieces of what the sustainability circle is. It's like, hey, let's do climate over here. Let's do social equity and social sustainability over here, where in some ways we're trying to bring those back together so we can be much more holistic. So we're always referencing each other's work. So version 2.0 of both we'll be bringing them back together.
Cool. Yeah, and then just to like reiterate, I totally understand not wanting to have to totally repeat what another document already states, but I think it's really hard to understand easily if there isn't some amount of repetition, you know, like being told you have to then flip through another 100+ page document is kind of frustrating.
Totally hear you.
We are a few minutes beyond our appointed hour. I want to thank again, this has been, wow, so much information, so much to consider. There's so much good work being done, and I really appreciate everybody who's come to share today and to listen to yes, as Michaela is saying in the chat, an important conversation. And thank you all so much. And we really appreciate you and appreciate you staying a few minutes late. Vanessa, is there anything else?
No, just want to reiterate thanks to Radcliffe, Edie, and Michael for and your graciousness in responding to what might come off as a critique. And really, it's just the planning commissioners are really passionate about this work, invested in this work, and invested in helping being a value add to you all. So please consider the commission a think tank to bounce ideas off. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. And we are adjourned.
Thank you so much.
Thanks all.
Appreciate your comments.
Thank you. Thanks
question.
all.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
You as well.